powerful speeches, battle strategies, and iconic leaders. This is how most remember World War II. But the real story of who really pulled the strings in World War II is more disturbing. As Hitler, Churchill, Roosevelt, Stalin, and Hirohito plotted in war rooms, an industrial machine whirred beneath the surface, turning profit into power. GM trucks rolled off Cologne assembly lines for the Nazi blitzkrieg, while Standard Oil's chemicals fueled Luftwaffe planes, and bankers in neutral Switzerland quietly greased the gears of war for Axis and allies alike. If the fate of millions was shaped behind closed doors, not just on the battlefield, then are we honoring the wrong masterminds? The answer lies in the shadows just ahead. In September 1939, Hitler unleashed blitzkrieg across Poland, sending tanks and men racing east while Luftwaffe bombers darkened the sky. Within weeks, Warsaw fell, and the world watched as German armies swept through Europe with a speed and coordination never seen before. In London, Winston Churchill rallied his nation with nightly radio broadcasts, his words a shield against despair as bombs rained down during the Blitz. Across the Atlantic, Franklin Roosevelt promised to make America the arsenal of democracy, signing the Lend-Lease Act in March 1941 and ordering factories to churn out weapons, trucks, and planes for embattled allies. In Moscow, Joseph Stalin ordered entire industries uprooted and shipped east of the Urals, beyond the reach of German advance. Over 1,500 factories moved in a matter of months, saving Soviet production from destruction. Farther east, Emperor Hirohito presided over Japan's expansion across China and Southeast Asia. The Imperial Army seizing oil fields, rubber, and tin bomb to fuel its ambitions. Each leader projected the image of absolute command, decisive, unyielding, the face of national will. Yet every bold order depended on the silent work of millions: engineers, financiers, industrial planners, and supply chiefs whose decisions shaped the lines of battle as surely as any general. The public saw only the speeches and the flags. But behind every victory and every defeat, the machinery of war demanded resources, production, and the quiet cooperation of those who controlled the means to fight. The next moves would not be made on maps alone. In the heart of the Reich, the smokestacks of E.G. Farben, Krupp, and Siemens pumped out the weapons and chemicals that powered Hitler's armies. I.G. Farben's laboratories produced synthetic fuel and rubber, making up for Germany's lack of oil and keeping tanks rolling deep into Russia. The same company manufactured Zyklon B, the gas used in Auschwitz and other camps. Forced labor camps ringed these industrial sites. Tens of thousands worked under armed guard, many never leaving alive. At the Krupp works in Essen, armaments flowed from assembly lines manned by prisoners and foreign workers. Their labor traded directly with the SS. Siemens electrified the war effort, wiring bunkers and factories, while expanding its own empire through contracts with the Nazi state. Across the Atlantic, American corporate giants found profit in the war's shadows. Ford's Cologne plant delivered over 78,000 trucks to the Wehrmacht, 1 out of every 4 new army trucks in the early 1940s. Opel, owned by General Motors, supplied engines and vehicles used in the Blitzkrieg. Even as bombs fell on London, Standard Oil and DuPont's patents for tetraethyl lead, a vital gasoline additive, enabled German bombers to fly farther and hit harder. IBM's punch card machines leased to Berlin sorted census data and tracked prisoners with chilling precision. Executives in Detroit, New York, and Berlin signed contracts and exchanged telegrams, their profits shielded by complex subsidiaries and neutral intermediaries. While nations fought, these industrial powerhouses supplied both sides, turning war into business and business into war. In Basel, the Bank for International Settlements became the war's quietest crossroads. While armies clashed from Normandy to Stalingrad. Central bankers from both Axis and Allied nations gathered around the same polished tables, exchanging handshakes and coded telegrams. In March 1939, the BIS transferred 23 tons of gold from London's vaults to the Reichsbank. Gold seized from Czechoslovakia just days before. The transaction was signed off by the Bank of England's governor, Montague Norman, who cited the rules of neutrality even as diplomats protested. Through the early years of the war, the BIS processed interest payments for Germany in gold, often bullion melted down to erase its Belgian or Dutch origins. Ledgers recorded shipments that had crossed borders under cover of darkness, sometimes routed through Swiss, Portuguese, or Spanish banks. In Switzerland, the National Bank accepted over 80 tons of gold from Berlin, much of it later identified as looted. Swiss officials, including Paul Rossi and Alfred Schaefer, claimed ignorance of its true source, while quietly facilitating transfers to Lisbon and Madrid. Neutrality provided a legal shield, but Allied intelligence tracked the flows, noting how looted gold funded German purchases of tungsten, oil, and other vital resources from neutral states. Meanwhile, on Wall Street, U.S. bond drives raised $185 billion, 8 massive campaigns that rallied 85 million Americans to finance the Allied war effort. The public lined up at banks and post offices, buying war bonds in amounts that dwarfed any secret gold movements. Yet behind the scenes, the corridors of international banking remained open. Even as bombs fell, the machinery of finance kept humming, funding the factories and fueling the tanks on both sides of the front. In the shadowed rooms of Bletchley Park, mathematicians and linguists worked day and night to crack the German Enigma code. Each intercepted message, decrypted by the Ultra Team, revealed U-boat positions and troop movements that saved convoys from disaster. In June 1941, a single decoded signal rerouted a British convoy away from a waiting wolf pack, sparing thousands of tons of vital supplies. Across the Atlantic, the newly formed Office of Strategic Services recruited scholars, actors, and exiles to run sabotage missions and plant false reports behind enemy lines. Soviet NKVD agents slipped into Allied research labs, copying blueprints and relaying atomic secrets back to Moscow. Information was a weapon, wielded in silence. In 1943, British planners staged Operation Mincemeat. A drowned man in a Royal Marines uniform, planted off the coast of Spain, carried forged invasion plans. German commanders, convinced by the ruse, shifted divisions away from Sicily, clearing the path for Allied landings. Double agents like Garbo fed the Abwehr a steady stream of invented details, turning Nazi intelligence into a hall of mirrors. On the airwaves, Joseph Goebbels' ministry flooded Europe with broadcasts promising victory and warning of traitors. But the BBC countered with news bulletins in dozens of languages, piercing the blackout with coded messages for resistance cells. In America, the Office of War Information scripted Hollywood films and radio dramas to rally public support and shape global opinion. Minds, not just armies, became the battleground. Victories were charted in code books and broadcast scripts long before they appeared on any map. Indian Army battalions advanced up the slopes of Monte Cassino in 1944, their ranks thinned by artillery and machine gun fire, yet their sacrifices rarely entered the official histories. Over 2 million Indian volunteers served under the British flag, fighting from North Africa to Burma, while regiments from Nigeria, Kenya, and the Gold Coast dug trenches and carried supplies across distant battlefields. French commanders deployed tirailleurs sénégalais to the Italian front, their courage in assault met with silence in post-war celebrations. Meanwhile, puppet governments like Vichy France and Manchukuo flew their own banners but answered to Berlin or Tokyo. Leaders such as Philippe, Pétain, and Emperor Puyi signed laws and issued proclamations, but German and Japanese officers controlled the real levers of power. The war's front lines stretched far beyond Europe, drawn by hands both visible and unseen. In the summer of 1942, Vatican envoys traveled discreetly between neutral capitals, delivering proposals for a negotiated armistice. Pope Pius XII's diplomats, using coded messages and trusted intermediaries, appealed to both Allied and Axis leaders for a truce that would spare civilians and restore occupied territories. Their offers received polite replies, but no commitments. Governments on both sides doubted the Vatican's influence and refused any deal short of total victory. Meanwhile, at Nordhausen and Peenemünde, American and Soviet teams raced to seize V-2 rocket engineers as Nazi defenses collapsed. Operation Paperclip spirited Wernher von Braun and his staff to U.S. soil, laying the groundwork for post-war technological supremacy. In July 1944, delegates from 44 nations gathered at Bretton Woods, hammering out the rules for a new world economy. The creation of the IMF and World Bank, along with the United Nations founding and its Security Council veto, handed lasting power to a select circle of states. While the guns fell silent, the blueprints for the post-war order were already signed in secret rooms, their authors drawn from the same hidden networks that shaped the war itself. Between 1941 and 1945, the United States issued over $185 billion in war bonds, a figure that speaks to the enormous financial machinery fueling World War II. Documents show that while leaders like Roosevelt, Hitler, and Churchill made critical decisions, their strategies were shaped by industrialists, bankers, and scientists working behind the scenes. Ford workers' truck output, gold transfers through the bank for international settlements, and secret intelligence operations all reveal a war orchestrated far beyond the battlefield. Yet, many records remain classified, and the full extent of certain financial and diplomatic ties is still unknown. The creation of institutions like the IMF and United Nations in 1944 and 1945 confirmed that wartime networks shaped the modern world order. Today, historians continue to uncover how control over money, resources, and information, not just armies, decided the fate of nations. The evidence shows wars are not only fought by soldiers, but determined by those who command industry, finance, and influence.